A pack of bears surrounded the truck. What happened next will shock you. The dying light painted long shadows across the Alaskan wilderness as Jack Thompson adjusted his camera's aperture for what he assumed would be his final shot of the day. 20 years of wildlife photography had taught him to recognize the peculiar stillness that descended just before dusk, when the world held its breath between day and night. But today was different. His calloused hands, steady from decades of handling expensive equipment, trembled slightly as he tracked the movement of a massive grizzly through his viewfinder. It wasn't the bear's size that unsettled him. He'd photographed countless grizzlies over his career. It was its behavior. "This isn't right," he muttered, lowering his camera and reaching for his field journal. The bear was the seventh he'd seen in the past hour, and like the others, it moved with deliberate purpose, almost military precision. They were gathering, coordinating in a way that defied everything he knew about solitary bear behavior. Jack's truck, his home away from home for the past 15 years, sat dead behind him, its engine as cold as the approaching night. The breakdown couldn't have come at a worse time or place, 50 miles from the nearest town, in a valley that seemed to grow more ominous with each passing minute. The custom-built vehicle was a testament to his dedication to his craft. Solar panels crowned the roof, powering his array of photography equipment and satellite communications. But now with the engine seized, it was little more than an elaborate shelter in the wilderness. He checked his satellite phone again. Still no signal. The towering peaks surrounding the valley seemed to mock his attempts at communication, their snow-capped summits catching the last rays of sunlight while shadows deepened in the valley below. Through his telephoto lens, Jack observed another grizzly emerging from the tree line. This one, a female he recognized from earlier in the week by the distinctive scar across her snout, moved with the same purposeful gait as the others. She paused, raised her head, and seemed to scan the horizon before continuing her deliberate path. 8, Jack tallied in his journal, adding another mark to his count. His scientific mind warred with his instincts. The photographer in him wanted to document this unprecedented behavior, but 20 years in the wild had honed his survival instincts to a razor's edge. Something was very wrong. The light continued to fade, and Jack activated the thermal imaging attachment on his camera. Through the infrared display, he watched as more bears emerged from different directions, their heat signatures bright against the cooling landscape. They moved like pieces on a chessboard, each taking up positions that seemed predetermined. His hands moved automatically, adjusting settings and capturing images that would later astound the scientific community. But for now, fear began to creep along his spine like ice water. The bears were forming a circle, and his disabled truck was at the center. Jack's breath fogged in the cooling air as he documented the unfolding scene. The bears maintained their positions, occasionally glancing toward the valley's eastern end. Their behavior suggested not aggression, but organization, a concept that challenged everything known about ursine behavior. As darkness settled fully over the valley, Jack retreated to his truck's cabin, his mind racing. 20 years of experience told him to be afraid, but his instincts as a naturalist told him to watch and wait. He had witnessed countless remarkable moments in nature, but nothing like this. Inside the truck, he reviewed the day's images on his laptop, each frame confirming what he had observed. The bears' movements were coordinated, their positioning strategic. But why? What could prompt such unprecedented behavior? The answer would come with the night, but for now, Jack Thompson, veteran wildlife photographer and self-proclaimed lone wolf, found himself surrounded by a circle of grizzly bears in the Alaskan wilderness. His truck's dead engine ensured he was going nowhere, and the gathering darkness promised revelations he couldn't yet imagine. He checked his equipment one final time. Cameras charged, thermal imaging ready, satellite phone still searching for a signal. Whatever was coming, he would document it. It was what he did. It was who he was. The last light faded from the sky, and the bears remained, sentinels in the gathering dark. Jack settled in for what would prove to be the longest night of his career, unaware that he was about to become part of one of the most extraordinary demonstrations of animal behavior ever recorded. The first hint of impending danger came not from the bears, but from Jack's thermal imaging equipment. At 10:47 p.m., his monitors displayed an anomaly, a wall of heat approaching from the eastern horizon. The temperature gradient was unmistakable. Wildfire. Jack's hands flew across his equipment, adjusting settings to confirm what his instruments were telling him. The infrared imagery painted a terrifying picture. A massive firestorm advancing through the valley, its heat signature blazing across his screen like a demon's smile. "Dear God," he whispered, understanding finally dawning. The bears had known. Somehow they had sensed the approaching inferno long before his sophisticated equipment detected it. But their behavior still defied explanation. Wild animals typically fled from fire, yet these bears maintained their positions, their circle around his truck unwavering. Through his night vision equipment, Jack observed the massive grizzly he dubbed Scarface, the female with the distinctive facial marking, rise on her hind legs. She released a series of low, rhythmic grunts, unlike any bear vocalization he documented in his career. To his astonishment, other bears responded with similar calls, creating what could only be described as a coordinated communication network. His photographer's instincts took over. Jack activated every recording device at his disposal, capturing the unprecedented exchange. The bears' calls seemed to carry specific information, direction, urgency, coordination. It was as if he was witnessing the emergence of a complex language that science had never documented. More wildlife began appearing at the periphery of his camera's range. Moose, wolves, and smaller animals gathered, guided by the bear's vocalizations. Instead of the chaos that usually accompanied predator-prey interactions, there was order. The bears were creating safe corridors, directing the evacuation of the valley's inhabitants. "This is impossible," Jack muttered, but his cameras captured the undeniable truth. He watched as a wolf pack, typically mortal enemies of bears, moved through a gap in the circle. The bears maintained their positions, allowing safe passage. The wolves paused briefly, acknowledging the bears with a strange mix of caution and what appeared to be understanding. The heat signature of the fire grew stronger. Jack's equipment indicated the temperature rising steadily, and the first hints of smoke reached his nostrils. His survival training screamed at him to flee, but the bears' circle remained unbroken. They were waiting for something. Scarface approached his truck, her massive form illuminated by the growing orange glow on the horizon. She stood barely 10 feet from his driver's side window, her dark eyes reflecting intelligence that challenged everything Jack thought he knew about wildlife. She wasn't displaying aggression. She was waiting for him to understand. Jack's satellite phone suddenly chirped. One bar of signal, enough for a text. His fingers flew across the keypad, sending his coordinates and a brief message to his emergency contact. "Massive wildfire. Bears acting as guides. Following their lead. Track my GPS." He knew how insane it sounded, but he had no choice. The smoke was thickening now, and Jack could see the first flames cresting the eastern ridge. The fire moved faster than any he'd witnessed in his career, driven by strong winds and drought-parched vegetation. Yet fear was gradually being replaced by a strange sense of trust in these magnificent creatures that had chosen to protect rather than flee. Through his thermal imaging, Jack watched as the bears began to move in perfect synchronization, maintaining their protective circle but slowly shifting position. Scarface grunted again, and Jack understood. They were showing him the way out. He turned the key in his truck's ignition, knowing it was futile. The engine had died hours ago, seizing completely, but to his astonishment, it coughed once, twice, then roared to life. The bears had waited until the heat from the approaching fire had warmed the engine enough to break whatever had frozen it. "Incredible," Jack breathed, his camera still recording. The bears were not just showing intelligence. They were demonstrating an understanding of mechanics, of cause and effect. They had known the truck needed heat to function again. The circle of bears began moving west, maintaining their formation around his vehicle. Jack engaged the drive, following their lead. Through his cameras, he captured an extraordinary scene. Bears clearing fallen trees from their path, working in teams to move obstacles, all while maintaining their protective formation around his truck. Other animals fell into line behind them, a parade of wildlife moving in orchestrated exodus. The bears had created a living evacuation route, guiding not just Jack but the valley's entire ecosystem to safety. The fire roared behind them, but Jack's fear had been replaced by wonder. He was part of something unprecedented, something that would challenge humanity's understanding of wildlife intelligence and cooperation. His cameras captured every moment, every coordinated movement, every instance of interspecies communication. As they moved through the valley, Jack noticed another remarkable phenomenon. The bears were not just leading, they were actively managing the evacuation. When younger animals panicked at the approaching fire, adult bears would break formation briefly to guide them back to safety. They worked with a level of coordination that suggested not just intelligence, but compassion. The smoke grew thicker and embers began raining down around them. Yet the bears maintained their formation, their massive bodies shielding his truck from the worst of the heat. They were sacrificing their own safety to protect him. Understanding that his vehicle was both his shelter and his weakness, Jack checked his instruments one last time, ensuring every moment was being recorded. The scientific community would need evidence to believe what was happening here. This single night would revolutionize our understanding of animal consciousness, cooperation, and intelligence. The fire's roar grew louder, but Jack Thompson, for the first time since his truck broke down, felt absolutely safe. He was under the protection of creatures that had chosen to demonstrate not just their intelligence, but their capacity for altruism. As they moved through the smoke-filled night, Jack realized he was no longer just documenting wildlife. He was participating in one of the most extraordinary displays of interspecies cooperation ever witnessed. The world had become an apocalyptic tableau of orange flame and black smoke. Jack's truck thermometer read 120 degrees Fahrenheit and climbing, but inside the protective circle of bears, the temperature remained surprisingly manageable. Through his windshield, he watched as Scarface and her companions orchestrated what could only be described as a sophisticated firefighting operation. The bears had developed a rotating system. While some maintained the protective circle around his truck, others would break away to clear burning debris from their path. They worked with the precision of a military unit, using their massive strength to create fire breaks and safe passages through the inferno. "This is unprecedented," Jack spoke into his digital recorder, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "The bears are demonstrating not just coordinated behavior, but tactical thinking. They're creating escape routes by clearing burning vegetation and appear to have knowledge of fire behavior that rivals human firefighters." A massive burning pine crashed across their path. Before Jack could process the danger, 3 bears broke formation and attacked the obstacle. They didn't just move the tree, they strategically rolled it downhill, using it to divert a stream of burning debris away from their escape route. The sophistication of their problem-solving left Jack speechless. His cameras captured everything. Through the thermal imaging, he watched as the bears used their bodies to shield smaller animals from the intense heat. When a young moose panicked and nearly ran into the flames, 2 bears gently but firmly herded it back to safety, demonstrating an almost parental instinct that crossed species boundaries. Scarface remained near the truck's driver's side, occasionally rising on her hind legs to survey their surroundings. Jack noticed she would make different vocalizations based on what she observed: short, sharp grunts for immediate dangers, longer, rolling sounds for directional changes. The other bears responded instantly to these signals, adjusting their positions with military precision. The smoke was getting thicker, and Jack's eyes burned despite the truck's air filtration system. He checked his oxygen levels. The equipment he used for high-altitude photography was proving invaluable in the smoke-filled air. Through his cameras, he observed something remarkable. The bears were taking turns moving to higher ground, apparently scouting safer routes through the burning forest. "They're not just reacting to the fire," he recorded, excitement breaking through his exhaustion. "They're anticipating its movement, predicting where it will spread based on wind patterns and terrain." This suggests a level of cognitive ability far beyond what we've attributed to any non-human species. A sudden explosion of burning sap from a nearby pine sent a shower of flaming debris toward the truck. Before Jack could react, 4 bears positioned themselves as living shields, using their thick fur and mass to protect the vehicle. The air filled with the acrid smell of singed fur, but the bears held their positions, prioritizing the safety of their charge over their own comfort. Jack's satellite phone chirped again. Another brief signal. A text from his emergency contact confirmed that fire crews were aware of his location and movement. He wanted to tell them to wait, to let this remarkable evacuation continue without human intervention. He feared that the arrival of firefighting crews might disrupt the bears' sophisticated operation. The night wore on, and the escape continued. Jack observed how other wildlife had integrated themselves into the bears' evacuation plan. Wolves acted as scouts, running ahead to find clear paths. Moose used their strength to help clear larger obstacles. Even smaller animals played their parts, with foxes and coyotes somehow understanding their roles in this unprecedented cooperative effort. Through his thermal imaging, Jack captured images of the bears creating what he could only describe as fire breaks, cleared paths through the burning forest that helped slow the fire's advance. They seemed to understand the principle of fuel removal in firefighting, though how they had acquired this knowledge remained a mystery. The bears are demonstrating what appears to be generational knowledge, he noted into his recorder. These aren't instinctive responses, they're learned behaviors, passed down and refined over time. This suggests a level of cultural transmission we've never observed in non-primate species. The truck's thermometer continued to climb, but the bears maintained their protective formation. Jack noticed they had developed a rotation system, with bears taking turns moving to the outer circle where the heat was most intense, then rotating to inner positions to cool down. The level of organizational complexity was staggering. A particularly violent gust of wind drove the flames closer, and for a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm Jack. But Scarface appeared at his window, her presence somehow reassuring. In her eyes, he saw not the mindless aggression humans often attributed to wild animals, but calculated intelligence and what he could only describe as compassion. "We've been wrong," he spoke softly into his recorder. "So wrong about these creatures. Their capacity for complex thought, for cooperation, for altruism, it rivals our own, maybe even surpasses it in some ways." The night had become a blur of heat, smoke, and coordinated movement. Jack's cameras continued recording, capturing evidence that would soon challenge the foundations of how humans understood animal intelligence. Every frame documented behaviors that defied current scientific understanding. Bears using tools, implementing strategies, communicating across species barriers. As they pushed through another wall of smoke, Jack realized that he was no longer just documenting a natural phenomenon. He was participating in an event that would reshape humanity's relationship with the natural world. These bears weren't just saving his life, they were demonstrating that the boundaries between human and animal intelligence were far more fluid than anyone had imagined. The fire continued its relentless pursuit, but within the bear's protective circle, Jack Thompson felt a growing sense of wonder overshadowing his fear. He was witnessing evolution in action, adaptation at its finest, and a level of interspecies cooperation that would force humanity to reevaluate its place in the natural order. "Whatever happens," he spoke into his recorder, watching as another team of bears cleared a burning barrier from their path. "Nothing in our understanding of wildlife behavior can ever be the same after tonight." The first rays of dawn painted the smoke-filled sky in surreal shades of crimson and gold. After 7 hours of continuous movement through the burning forest, Jack's truck, still surrounded by its ursine guardians, emerged into a clearing beside a lake. The sight that greeted him defied belief. Hundreds of animals had gathered in this natural sanctuary: deer, moose, wolves, and smaller creatures, all coexisting in an unprecedented peaceful assembly. The bears had led them not just to safety, but to a location that offered water, shelter, and natural fire protection in the form of rocky outcrops and a wide lake. 0547 hours, Jack spoke into his recorder, his voice raw from smoke inhalation. The bears appear to have coordinated multiple evacuation routes, all leading to this predetermined safe zone. The level of strategic planning suggests not just intelligence, but foresight and complex spatial awareness. Through his cameras, he documented how the bears maintained order in what should have been chaos. Predator and prey stood side by side, their normal hostilities suspended in the face of the greater threat. The bears had somehow communicated the need for cooperation across species barriers, creating a temporary peace that defied natural law. The sound of approaching helicopters broke the dawn silence. Jack watched as Scarface and several other bears moved to create a buffer between the arriving humans and the gathered wildlife. They weren't showing aggression, They were managing the interaction, ensuring the rescue operation wouldn't spark panic among the saved animals. "My God," came a crackled voice over Jack's radio, the first human contact he'd had in hours. "Thompson, are you seeing this? Are you getting this on camera?" "Every second," Jack replied, his equipment still recording. "But hold your position. Let them finish what they're doing. We're witnessing something unprecedented in natural history." The fire crews and first responders kept their distance, their own cameras now recording the extraordinary scene. News helicopters appeared on the horizon, drawn by reports of unusual wildlife behavior and a massive forest fire. Jack knew the world was about to change. The evidence he'd gathered overnight would challenge every preconception about animal intelligence and consciousness. Scarface approached his truck one final time, rising on her hind legs to peer through his window. Jack raised his hand to the glass, an instinctive gesture of connection. The bear's dark eyes held his gaze, and in that moment he understood that the barrier between human and animal consciousness was far more permeable than anyone had imagined. "Thank you," he whispered, knowing the words were inadequate for what he'd witnessed. The bear held his gaze for a moment longer, then dropped to all fours and began organizing the gradual dispersal of the gathered wildlife. The bears worked with the same coordinated precision they'd shown all night, ensuring the animals departed in small groups, maintaining order until the end. His satellite phone burst to life with incoming messages and calls. The scientific community was already mobilizing. Experts in animal behavior, cognitive scientists, wildlife biologists, all demanding preliminary reports. Jack began transmitting his data, knowing that each image and video would spark heated debate in laboratories and universities worldwide. "The implications are staggering," he dictated into his recorder, watching as the bears orchestrated the final phase of their rescue operation. "We're not just dealing with instinctive behavior or simple learned responses. These bears demonstrated abstract thinking, strategic planning, and cross-species communication. They showed empathy, not just toward each other, but toward other species, including humans." The morning light revealed the full extent of the bears' achievement. The fire had carved a destructive path through the valley, but their coordinated efforts had saved countless lives. GPS tracking would later confirm that similar gatherings of wildlife had occurred at other locations. The bears had orchestrated multiple rescue operations simultaneously. As the smoke began to clear, emergency response teams moved in with medical supplies and wildlife experts. Jack noticed how the bears adjusted their positions to allow human assistance while maintaining enough presence to prevent panic among the wildlife. They were facilitating the transition from their protection to human care. His cameras captured the gradual departure of the bears, their movement as coordinated as their arrival had been. They didn't simply flee now that their task was complete. They withdrew strategically, ensuring the stability of the situation they'd created. Scarface was among the last to leave, pausing at the forest's edge as if to verify that her charges were truly safe. Jack's hands shook as he reviewed the night's footage. The thermal imaging had captured details his eyes had missed. Complex patterns of communication, sophisticated firefighting techniques, and evidence of tactical decision-making that would revolutionize our understanding of animal intelligence. "We have to protect them," he spoke into his recorder, emotion finally cracking his professional demeanor. "What we've witnessed here isn't just about survival or instinct. These bears showed us something profound about consciousness itself. They demonstrated that intelligence, compassion, and cooperation aren't human monopolies. They're fundamental aspects of life that we share with other species." The first wildlife biologist reached his position, their expressions moving from skepticism to awe as he showed them his preliminary footage. Jack knew the coming days would be filled with debriefings, interviews, and scientific scrutiny, but for now he focused on completing his documentation of this extraordinary event. In the growing daylight, he could see the massacre the fire had left behind. Burned trees, scorched earth, and devastation that would take years to heal. But in this clearing, thanks to the bear's intervention, life had been preserved. Not just individual lives, but the complex web of relationships that made up the forest ecosystem. As the last of the bears disappeared into the forest, Jack made his final recording of the night. "What we witnessed here wasn't just about survival. These bears showed us that consciousness, intelligence, and compassion exist on a spectrum we're only beginning to understand. They've given us not just evidence of their capabilities, but a mandate to protect and preserve the complex consciousness that exists in the natural world. The sun rose fully over the scarred landscape, and Jack Thompson, exhausted but transformed, began the task of sharing his evidence with a world that was about to have its understanding of wildlife consciousness fundamentally altered. The night of the fire had ended, but its implications were just beginning to emerge. 6 months after the night of the fire, Jack Thompson stood before a packed auditorium at the International Wildlife Conservation Conference in Geneva. Behind him, high-definition screens displayed frame-by-frame analysis of the bear's coordinated rescue operation. The audience, a mixture of scientists, conservationists, and policymakers, sat in rapt attention. "What you're seeing," Jack explained, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed something extraordinary, "isn't just a random response to danger. These bears demonstrated complex problem-solving abilities, strategic thinking, and most importantly, intentional cooperation across species barriers. The evidence had been scrutinized by experts worldwide. Every frame of footage, every thermal imaging recording, every data point had been analyzed and authenticated. The scientific community had moved from skepticism to amazement as the full scope of the bear's intelligence became clear." Dr. Sarah Chen, head of cognitive animal studies at Stanford, approached the podium next to Jack. "The implications of Mr. Thompson's documentation are revolutionary," she addressed the audience. "We've discovered that these bears possess a sophisticated communication system, complete with regional dialects and specialized vocalizations for specific situations. They're not just responding to stimuli, they're planning, coordinating, and teaching these behaviors to their young." In the months following the fire, research teams had documented similar cooperative behaviors among bear populations across North America. The night of the fire hadn't been an isolated incident. It had simply been the first time humans had comprehensively documented these capabilities. Jack's photographs and videos had sparked a global movement. The Guardian Bears Act had passed through Congress with unprecedented bipartisan support, establishing vast protected territories and funding for continued research. Similar legislation was being adopted worldwide as humanity began to recognize the sophisticated consciousness present in these remarkable animals. But perhaps most significant, Jack continued, advancing to his final slides, is what we've learned about interspecies cooperation. These bears didn't just save themselves. They orchestrated the rescue of an entire ecosystem. They demonstrated an understanding of not just their own needs, but the needs of other species, including humans. The presentation included recent footage of bear populations in the affected area. They had returned to their normal behaviors, but observers now noticed subtle complexities that had been overlooked before. The bears maintained sophisticated social networks, taught survival skills to their young, and continued to demonstrate remarkable problem-solving abilities. Jack's own life had transformed dramatically. He'd established the Thompson Wildlife Intelligence Research Foundation, dedicated to studying and protecting animal consciousness in all its forms. His photography now focused on documenting evidence of advanced intelligence and cooperation in wildlife populations worldwide. "We've had to rewrite our understanding of animal consciousness," he explained, showing thermal images from the night of the fire. "These bears didn't just save lives. They challenged our entire conception of intelligence. They showed us that consciousness exists on a spectrum far more complex than we imagined." The scientific papers generated from his documentation had revolutionized multiple fields: animal behavior, cognitive science, evolutionary biology. Researchers had identified sophisticated neural networks in bear brains that suggested capabilities for abstract thinking and complex problem-solving. But beyond the scientific implications, the event had transformed humanity's relationship with wildlife. People began viewing bears not as threats to be managed, but as intelligent beings worthy of respect and protection. Tourism changed from exploitation to observation, as people sought to understand rather than simply photograph these remarkable creatures. Jack's voice softened as he showed the final image: Scarface, the bear who had led the rescue operation, photographed recently with 2 cubs. "These bears didn't just demonstrate intelligence that night," he said. "They showed us compassion, cooperation, and a kind of wisdom we're only beginning to understand. They challenged us to be better stewards of the natural world. The impact extended beyond bears. Researchers began documenting similar instances of intelligence and cooperation among other species. The Night of the Fire had opened humanity's eyes to the sophisticated consciousness present throughout the natural world. We stand at a crossroads, Jack concluded, his voice carrying the weight of his experience. We can continue to view ourselves as separate from and superior to the natural world, or we can recognize that we're part of a complex web of conscious beings. The bears showed us the way. Now it's up to us to follow their example. The legislation sparked by the event had already shown positive results. Bear populations were recovering in protected areas, and new research stations were documenting unprecedented examples of wildlife intelligence and cooperation. The Night of the Fire had become a catalyst for a new era of conservation and understanding. Jack's final slide showed the clearing where the bears had led the evacuation. The burned forest was recovering, new growth emerging from the ash-shed earth. But more importantly, motion-activated cameras had captured continued evidence of the bears' sophisticated behavior, teaching their young, cooperating in complex tasks, maintaining the delicate balance of their ecosystem. "We didn't just witness a rescue that night," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "We witnessed a revelation about the nature of consciousness itself. These bears didn't just save lives. They saved our understanding of what it means to be conscious, intelligent, and alive on this planet." As the lights came up in the auditorium, Jack knew that his work was far from complete. The Night of the Fire had been just the beginning, a wake-up call to humanity about the sophisticated consciousness that existed beyond our species. The bears had shown us a path toward a new relationship with the natural world. Now it was up to humans to honor their example. The applause that followed wasn't just for his presentation. It was an acknowledgement of a fundamental shift in human understanding. The bears had done more than survive a fire. They had ignited a transformation in how humans perceived and interacted with the natural world. Their legacy would continue to shape conservation, research, and human-wildlife relationships for generations to come.